Welcome everybody. Tonight we're working on Unit 5, where we will be expanding our knowledge of CSS, how to style text, working with graphics and images, and more on colors and other related topics. The topic list, of course, is here at the top of the screen, and I do also have lecture notes that match this list here below, and I'm going to kind of be using this as my guide as we go through. The first topic that we're going to start talking about is more than a superficial look at placing images on a web page. I am going to be coding at some point. At least initially, what I'm going to be doing is talking about concepts, and then when I feel like, okay, let's go ahead and throw this stuff on a page, I will go through that process. But images and graphics on web pages are kind of one of the cool things that separates web pages from other like information delivery formats, right? Because, and it's not just images, right? Like when we look at a web page, it can be very compelling if the graphic content is nicely put together. If there's an impactful image, a nice logo, a good use of color, the image is sharp and not blurry, it's not contorted, it matches the content, it's all those like goofy little things that you maybe don't initially think about. And without really getting in deeply into like, making this like a graphic design course, I mean, there are aspects of web development that really do kind of overlap that. I am going to dig into the lecture notes this way, if you guys don't mind, because I think this is a little bit cleaner look. Now, when we played with our very first unit assignment, I had you add an image to a web page, and I showed you very quickly how to go out to the web and grab one, do a right click, save as, grab that image and throw it on your web page, right? You throw it in your folder, then you create a link and you have it on your web page. And I think it might be pertinent for me here to maybe get right into coding mode right away. All right, so I thought I was going to wait a little bit to do this, but apparently not. I guess I'm going to do it right away. So like one of the things that you will do, like when you're working on your assignment, and when you're working on your assignment, I would encourage you, if you could, follow this video, because I'm going to try to accomplish all the assignment goals in the video as in lecturing. So it's kind of like lecture demo combo. The best practice, I think, is like when you take your work each week and make a new copy of it so you have a fresh starting point. I know I say this is kind of like a broken record thing, but repetition makes for perfection. Musicians don't get good by not practicing. The more you practice, the better you are at it. And coding is the same way. So I made a copy of my Unit 4 content. I'm assuming, right, a couple of things. A, all the content there is good. There's no errors in it. It's all validated. That I have a consistent semantic structure between the pages. And when we start doing CSS stuff, this is when it starts to get in there. And, it's like, hey, my one page looks great, but my other one still looks terrible, right? And the point is, if you use the same structure, it will look consistent from page to page. Now, I am going to rename this Unit 5. Notice, no spaces, no uppercase letters. That's my convention. That way, when I move this folder up to the server, it's ready to go, right? I'm going to dig into the folder, and then I am going to open up this folder location inside of Visual Studio Code before I start coding. So I'm going to fire up Visual Studio Code. It's probably going to have stuff in here from last night's natural language processing class, which we get pretty intense here. So you can, if you guys want to sneak preview of that stuff, here it is. I'm going to close these files, and then I'm going to open a different folder. And I'm going to attach to the folder that I was basically just looking at here. So it's going up here in my Google Drive. I'm in fall 25, and I'm going to open it on this level here so that I can actually see, that folder structure that we've been working on. So I can see all my unit folders here. Right. So this also allows me, if I need to, go into one of the other folders and grab content if necessary. You'll notice that my welcome screen's still open. I'm just going to get rid of that. And then I have these pages that are open from I don't know when, so I'm just closing them because I don't want to be in unit 2. I now want to be working in unit 5. And before I do any coding, let's just take a look at what we have here, and let me make sure that my structure is okay, right? And so I'm going to open up my index file, and then I'm going to notice here a few different things. And actually, let's play with a couple of tools here in Visual Studio Code, because I don't know if you guys like notice as I hover over this sidebar area that's in between the line numbers and the code, these little drop arrows come in. And if you'll notice, if I collapse one of those, I can take an HTML tag and collapse it down to its essential components. And notice what happens here, right? This is kind of the anatomy of a document, folks. We start with the doc type at the top, and then everything else on the page sits within the HTML tags. And then within the HTML tags, we have 2 key areas. The head tag, that contains all the non-visible parts of the page. And then the body tag, which contains really the content and the structure of the page. If I expand the head section, you'll notice I have my meta character set in there. Technically, that's required by the standard, but if you don't put it in, that's what's assumed. I think it's better practice to include it. There's very few circumstances where you change that. It's usually like weird foreign language situations and things like that where you do it. The title goes in there, a link to your style sheet. We'll be adding other stuff in there today, including links to a favorites icon. Maybe you might put some styles in here, and later on you'll add JavaScript links as well in this area. In the body section, once again, this is where the structure and the content is, but notice that the structure and the content on my pages is arranged in this hierarchy. Within the body, I have the header. Then I have my navigation. I will say right off the bat, some people prefer to have the navigation inside of the header. That's a personal choice, and it's not a right or wrong. And so I have header, navigation, main, and footer. The header will contain kind of my logos and the stuff that goes at the top of the page. And right now, this is still a work in progress. I haven't really decided quite yet what that's going to look like. It'll get closer tonight. Then I have my navigation. This is a list of links. Eventually, I'm going to make this into a fancy looking little navigation bar. And kind of like what Rachel was showing earlier, right? Like where she has a background color on it and the text is centered. I'm going to go for a very similar approach. Why do we do that? Real frankly, when you go out to web pages and you look at web pages, that's how most are arranged. People are used to seeing some sort of header content at the top, then a navigation bar, and then the content, and maybe at the bottom a footer. So I follow that approach. Why? Because it works well, and that's what people expect. And so it makes people comfortable when they come to your site to find that same format. It's easier for them to navigate, basically. I'm going to skip over the content section, the main section right now, and go to the footer. This will be stuff that's at the bottom that always repeats on every page. And right now I have a little copyright logo, you know, and really this copyright is inappropriate because I'm not the Green Bay Packers and it's not 2024, by the way. I also have an email link, but you could put all sorts of whatever repeating information you want at the footer of your page in that area. If I expand the main section, here I have, you know, more of like the actual page content that's unique to this page. That's kind of my thinking about it. Inside of here, you can place whatever you need to place. Images, words, paragraphs, you know, whatever the content is. And you see right now how I'm kind of collapsing my stuff down. I'm getting rid of superfluous spaces. I'm looking at the indentation, but I'm generally pretty happy with this structure. I think this is a good structure. I'm going to save the changes to the index page. There weren't many, just a little spacing that I removed. I will then open up my other pages, and I want you to notice that these other pages follow the exact same semantic structure. So if I'm commenting on your code and I'm saying, hey, your semantic structure is not quite right, or you did it on one page, but you didn't do it on the other page, one of your first tasks should be to take that semantic structure and apply it to every page. That way, when you load up your site and you go from page to page to page, it will look the same. Ideally, it'll have the same header, footer, and navigation on all pages. The stuff that you'll really be changing will be in the main area, or the main tag, or the main content area, if you will. Right. So that's got the same structure, and that's got the same structure. All right. So make that like kind of one of your first tasks, is to fix that. And you don't have to do it while you're watching the video, but I guess if you're watching as a video, you can pause it and do that. I mean, it doesn't really take that long to readjust your stuff. You'll see a lot of benefits from it right out of the gate, especially when it comes to styling things. The other thing that I'll say is, before we start digging in here, some of the styles now, all your pages should have a link to your style sheet. I had made a requirement before that you should try an embedded style. And that's great that you did that. But at this point, I release you from the obligation of doing that going forward. You can take those styles and add them to your style sheet. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just take this style here, for example, and I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to open up my style sheet. And, somewhere at the bottom here, I'll just throw that in. That came from my About page. I don't know if I'll need these style tags. Probably the only reason I would use them would be for experimentation's sake more than anything. So I'm not bouncing between files, but I'm going to remove them. That's my choice. You might probably want to do the same. I'm going to check my other pages. This one does not have embedded styles. This one does not have embedded styles. I did notice that somewhere here, and I'm not even sure where, right here, I had an inline style. I also relinquish you from the obligation to do that, right? If there's still situations, and I'll remind you, usually the key situation where those two happen, embedded or inline styles, is you're working in a content management system like WordPress or Drupal, and you have no access to the style sheet, and this is your only way to change something, right? Otherwise, it's really discouraged generally. It also makes the code harder to read, doesn't it, when you throw that stuff in? So notice that now I've changed 3 of my pages, and I know that because in my style sheet, right? Because these are circles and not X's when I hover over it. So you can save all of those at once using Save All. Right. Another handy tip, so I don't have to go one page save, another page save, another page save. Can you imagine if you had 50 pages open? Yeah, Save All is a wonderful tool. Okay, so now we're ready to start trying some stuff. And the first thing that we're going to look at here is the fact that I do already have an image included on my website. I think, if I remember, and I'm going to go to the browser to verify this, mind you. And of course, I don't have it open in the browser. Let's open it in the browser. And if I remember right, that was the home page is the only page that had an image. It's not ideally placed. It's not, it's a nice image. I mean, I borrowed it from somewhere. But it could be a whole lot better. Anyhow, but for right now, our goal is, let's get the images on the screen and let's make them a reasonable size, and make sure they look good, right? And these are, it's as simple as that sounds. Sometimes that can be a challenge for people. So let's re-engineer our website now to move that image into a subfolder. So it really is not good practice to have your images in the root of your website. Okay, if you have like just a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 images, whatever, right? You only have a few pages, not a problem. I have worked on websites, both static and dynamic ones, where I ended up with like tens of thousands of images. You don't want tens of thousands of images. Like, you open the folder and it's like a gazillion files. That's a really bad practice. So what most designers do is they will add a folder, and you notice I'm inside of Unit 5 right now, that folder, and there is a tool right inside of Visual Studio Code where you can add a folder, and I'm just going to call it images. Notice all lowercase letters, and this is my convention. I usually, when I'm putting images on a website, I usually always have an images folder named exactly that. Okay, now why? Could you name it pictures or graphics or media? Sure, that's fine. If you want to do that, name it something that makes sense to you. For me, this is my convention. So I don't even have to think about it. Anytime I'm looking for an image, all of my links will be updated to include that at the beginning of them. I don't have to guess at it. That's my convention. And I think it's a really solid, normal kind of convention to follow. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this graphic and I'm going to move it into that folder, right? And it says, are you sure you want to move it? And I'm like, yes, please do move it. You can also make these file maneuvers outside of this environment. You can do it in your operating system if that's easier for you, right? And I get that the tools here inside of Visual Studio Code, they're not as slick as your operating system's file management, right? But it does work, right? And I don't have to leave the product to do it. Now, notice the page didn't change, right? I didn't update my code. And I just want to show you what's going to happen in the browser now when I refresh. Now the image doesn't show. And what's showing here instead? Well, I got this like generic icon that's supposed to represent an image. And then we have this text that appears. And the text that appears is by virtue of this alt tag. And let's talk about that alt tag. This is required by the HTML5 standard for any image that you add to a web page. So if I don't include an alt tag and I take it to the W3 validator, it's going to say, hey, there's no alt tag on this. That's required by the standard. The reason it's required by the standard is the same reason we were just talking about before I hit the record on this recording. It's because we make this naive assumption that everybody that visits a web page can see. No, there's people that are blind that surf web pages and use screen readers. And when they hit that image with the screen reader, it'll say, you know, and really a better alt tag would be a picture of Lambeau Field, even though that's not what it is. It's actually a picture of a couple players, but it should, the alt tag should describe what's in the image, ideally. If the image is decorative, so let's say it's like a background texture, something like that, where it's not really a picture of anything. You know, it's just like a granular, cool looking thing in the background of your web page. You can leave it blank. That's acceptable if it's decorative, because really it has no impact on the content. You feel what I mean? The other reason we have that there is for exactly the reason that we demonstrated here. What if it doesn't load? Sometimes the internet has hiccups or stuff gets deleted accidentally. It's much more helpful if it says a picture of Lambeau Field or a picture of 3 Green Bay Packer players with a headline or whatever. You can actually get very verbose with alt tags. And in fact, the new movement in HTML is I see people dropping paragraphs in alt tags. The other aspect of it that's kind of interesting is alt tags are picked up by search engines. So if you have an image of, let's say, a logo for your business, you can say, let's say, Joe's Tree Service logo, you know, or something like that. And that way, when people are looking for your logo or whatever it is you're offering, they can specifically search for it and it will come up in search engine results. If I just have a thing that says pick 2, for example, or I just copied it off my camera and it says image 2455 JPEG or something, that's not meaningful, right? So make the alt tag meaningful. We will also learn to add other parameters here, but really the key parameters for an image tag are the ones that we see here. IMG, the source link, which indicates where your image is located, and the alt tag. You can optionally add class identifiers, IDs, width and height declarations if needed. Although I caution you on using those. Those are ones that usually mess images up. And there's techniques for doing all of it. Right now, this image isn't loading. And really, I should probably, let's just update this to something more meaningful. A picture of Packers players and a headline, you know, whatever. I think that's probably adequate. Now, this image here, and I'm going to do something kind of interesting here, and I'm going to show you that how Visual Studio Code helps you. For example, if I'm actually typing in the source tag and I go like this, I'm going to type, I know what my folder's named. And you notice I just type the letter I. It's pulling up the images folder. So I'm clicking on it. And now it's in the folder. And it would give me a list of all my images. And if I know which image I'm pulling up, I can just click on it and it does the typing for me. Really nice advantage of this approach. You're not messing up what you're typing. Like, what if I dropped, a dash in here? That's not going to load, right? If I let the tool automatically grab it and fill out the code, there's no errors. Another technique, if you're hand coding, and I'll just throw this one out there too. This is more of like an old school approach, is if you don't remember, if the name is really weird for your file, you can come in here, right click and rename, and then do a Control A to select all and a Control C to copy. And then you can paste that into your code and you're not going to mistype it. That's another technique. I'd say that's a little bit more primitive. If your tool is doing it for you, let go, let the tool do it, absolutely. All right, let's save this really quick. Let's go back at a browser and refresh. And then you can see there's no change in the image, but now it's loading correctly, and more appropriately, the image is placed in my image folder. And from here on in, any image that I create or find for this website will go into this folder. When you get very complex websites, I would even go further and, I might have like folders inside of here to categorize the images perhaps as well, if that makes sense. In this case, I don't think that's going to be necessary. For a class of this level, probably not, but you could do that totally. Anytime you're adding folders, I want you to notice that we have to include the folder name and a / One question I do often get, and you notice how the tool put it in this way. Some people also throw in a / at the beginning. I'm going to save this and go back to the browser and refresh it. Notice what happens. You got to be really careful with that one because you do see examples of this. And, if this happens when you do that, then you need to remove it. There's really a better way to do it. This is the formally correct way to do it. Okay. Let's now talk about how you name your images, right? So I have an example, like if I dig into my folder structures here, and I don't know if this is linked up to, no, it's not. Okay. Somewhere here on my D drive, I have a folder where I kept all my digital photographs. And you see how far back I go with those. Like I got a digital camera in 1999. And then every time I would take a picture with my digital camera, I'd throw it in a folder, named by year, and then subcategorized, and on and on and on. And at some point, then I got a smartphone that backs it up to the cloud, and I stopped doing that, which probably isn't completely wise. But I'll just give you an example here. Like if I was looking in my, and that's not a good example. Let's say I'm looking in my 2014 folder, and I would date them, and here's some photos of my wife's trip to Cuba back in 2014 when it wasn't quite so legal, by the way. She had to go in through Canada to get there. But right, notice that these are images straight off of the camera, and notice the naming of the images, right? It's like the camera does whatever it wants and names it any way you want. What I would suggest, and I think it's very helpful, is if you import an image into your folder structure, it's probably a good idea to change the name of it to match what the photograph is once again. Right? And I think that way, when you look at your folder, it goes, I don't know, is it DSC 7227 or is it the 7228? Right. And then you're like, your only like tool then is to look at the thumbnails like this to find the right one. The other thing that I'll have you notice, and I am in Microsoft Windows, but the Mac also has a feature like this where you can, I'm just hovering over the image, and this here tells me a lot about the image just by hovering over it. I want you to notice it tells me what file format it is. This is a JPEG. When it was taken, the time, that's all embedded in the image, by the way. And I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but if you're doing it on a smartphone, location information is also added to your photograph in the form of metadata. So you know. Nobody will ever know where I took this photograph. Wrong. All they have to do is right click, look at the metadata, and they will find it, ironically. Um, the other thing that you'll notice is it indicates the dimension of the photograph, and this is a really important thing. Most digital cameras in our phones these days, when they capture an image, capture a resolution that is significantly larger than the screens that we're looking at them on. Why do they do that? Because that way the picture is really sharp, right? Capture a lot of pixels. And you notice this image, I don't even know what device it was taken with, probably my old Sony camera. It's 4,608 pixels across by 3,458 pixels tall. If I take that image and put it on a web page as is, it will overflow my screen by 3 or 4 times in both directions. My screen that we're looking at right now that I'm capturing and recording is 1,920 pixels. I'm trying to remember, but it's 1080 tall and 1920 wide. That's an HD screen. You might have a 2K screen that might be 2180 pixels across or tall by, I forget what the dimension is. But the reality is, and I want you to think about this really carefully, most web page content is absorbed on what type of device? A phone. And phone screens are significantly smaller in resolution. And on top of it, their orientation is tall, typically, and not wide. So you got to be really careful with images. The last thing you want to do is take a full resolution image, throw it up on the screen, and I'm going to see if I can just maybe demonstrate with this. See if I can just drag this into this folder here just to do the demonstration. So here's that famous spot in Havana, right? Looks pretty incredible, right? This is right in downtown. But I'm going to try to add this image to the web page just to let you see how big it is. And I'm not going to put it on the home page. I'll just maybe throw it on let's throw it on the about page, and I'll do it right here. And I'll just do a really quick image tag. And I'm going to do my source equals, and then I'm going to start typing image. Oh, and I didn't do equals, see, so that's why I didn't pull it up. So I'm going to do image. And then I'm going to pick that one because I know there's only 2, right? And then I'll have the alt tag and I'll say Havana, something like that. Okay, close the tag. Let's save it. I'm going to go to the browser. I'm going to hit my about page, and there's the image. Look at how big it is on the web page. You know, I'm scrolling. Okay, and you can see how blurry it is too, because this, probably a shaky hand taking a photograph. So clearly, this is way too large for this website. If I want to simulate a phone screen, and this is something you can very easily do, just take your browser and do that. That simulates a phone. What am I seeing in that image? Oh my God, you think you were scrolling on the widescreen. Now you're scrolling forever just trying to see it. So what you have to do, and this is a technique that you have to figure out basically, and you can use a number of different tools to do this, is one really necessary skill for a web developer is the ability to take a high resolution photograph, usually a better quality, and resize it. Some people will resize it using this really primitive method, and this is doable, right? So for example, we'll say, well, let's just make the width, I don't know, 500 pixels, and let's make the height, spell it right. I'm still not spelling it right. Let's make the height 300 pixels, and I'm guessing at the aspect ratio because I'm not calculating a ratio here. I'm just guessing, right? And I want you to watch what happens. I might actually guess pretty well, but okay, I made it smaller, and you can't really tell, but I am skewing the photograph a little bit, but I did make it smaller. So this technique does work. However, this is a highly discouraged technique. Here's the why. The file that I'm moving around is still very large. And then, okay, so I got to go back here. Guess I got to find my folder all over again. See how helpful it is to know where your stuff is. But if I hover over this, I haven't changed the size of the image, and I'm loading a 5 megabyte file on a web page. That's a big no-no. In fact, I used to make rules for this class where you should try to keep your images under 100 kilobytes, not this is 5 megabytes. That's like 5,000 times bigger than that, right? So have you ever gone to a web page and you hit an image and it's like either like drawing in line by line really slowly, or you're reading some words on the page and all of a sudden the image loads and your words pop up out of the way? That happens because people have not sized their images. So here's what I recommend that you do. You take the photograph, and you maybe good practice to just make a copy of it, right? And then maybe rename it. And this one's got uppercase letters for the JPEG. I don't know why. So I'm just going to say Havana JPEG. It's the same photograph still the same size, right? Still the same dimensions. But now I'm going to right click it. And I just want to let you know that you can do this on a Macintosh too with the preview tool. I'm on Windows, so I'm going to open it up with probably one of these paint tools, right? That's built in to Windows. The modern version is Paint 3D, so that's what I'm going to use. You can also use the image preview tool if you wish, right? The tool you use is irrelevant. If you have Photoshop available, or you have GIMP or one of the other photo editors, there's also free online editors that you can use. But our goal here is to resize the object. And I want you to notice right now that the zoom level is at 19%. So to get it to fit on the screen here comfortably, that's how small it is. It's like 1/5 the size of the original image just to put it on the screen like this. So what we want to do is we do want to resize it. So we'll go to the canvas button and notice that we have the ability to resize it. Now, notice they have a couple of little tools here, right? So when I resize the image with the canvas, if I make the canvas smaller, the image is also smaller, right? And that's really what we want. And then if I have a target width or height that I'm shooting for, sometimes you do because you're doing a design. Let's just go for a target width of 500. That's what I used before. It seemed to be an okay size. I'm going to press tab, and notice it auto calculated the number I should have typed in before, and the width should have been 375 because the aspect ratio is locked. So it mathematically adjusts it to the right number. And then I can move the slider or type the percentage up to 100% so I can see what I did. Now, once again, I'm not starting with a great quality image, right? But that image, if you look at it and compare it to what's in the browser, now you can see that this one is skewed where you couldn't really see it before, right? And okay, so this is a landscape. You don't notice it as much. But if it was a person's face, it's like, why do I look so fat? It's because you're stretching the image is why. And I know you've seen this on websites. Now, once you make that change, you can then go ahead and make a change to the image. So in other words, you can do a save, and I'm going to save it back to the same file. So if I go to the file folder now and make sure I refresh here, and then hover over Havana, oops, my mouse too far. Notice the dimensions reduced. Notice the size of the file. It is a tiny little pittance of what it was before. This will load really quick. This is best practice, folks. All right. So let's then go back to the code. Let's add that file in. So I'm going to just come back in here and tweak this. And I'm going to choose Havana. I'm going to save my work. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh. And there's the fix. However, here's a catch. It's still coming in skewed because I have the height set to 300 still, so I can take an image that's the right size and still ruin it. So one thing that you can do is if you insist on using width and height, and some people do insist on it because it reserves the spot on the screen for the image to appear. So if you use width and height, make sure that the width and height here match the actual width and height of the image. There are times when you do adjust it, but if you do adjust it proportionally. So I would either set this to 375, or I'm just going to put it out there. You don't need to include this at all because the image will still load. And that is very subjective. That's what the image really looks like on the page. And I know this isn't a great example. I really should find something that's relative to the Packers, right? So here's the next step then. All right, so we're working with these images. Where do you find images? Well, images are available in a lot of different places. And one of the easiest ways to find images, and I think we did this the first week, is you just do a search of like, Packers, click on images, and ideally you would find something that is in the Creative Commons licenses, which is going to be very little and not very cool looking images, by the way. But that's how it goes. Right? And in fact, I'm trying to see if it even pulls anything up here, because clearly the Packers, all right, these are probably fan photographs. So you might have something here that you might want to grab. But notice as I hover over some of these are licensable, meaning somebody owns them. Right, so this can be a challenging search. So what's the best way to get a photograph to add to your website? Okay, or a graphic. The true answer is take your own photographs. Hire a photographer. Buy a stock photo. Pay money for it because somebody took the picture and deserves to be paid for it. Or generate the image yourself. And I have put here on the page, and if you go back to the Unit 5 folder here, I'm trying to find the entry. Some sources for generating images and editing images. So like I did show you the internal tool in Windows. Macintosh has the preview tool where you can change the size of an image easily. You can also use Adobe Photoshop. And this one, unfortunately, even though this would be the industry standard for professionals, costs money and the subscription's not cheap, right? And that's really kind of a whole field of study. But there are some free graphics tools, and I'm not going to dig into these, but I would encourage you to explore these. There's GIMP on Windows, which is free. Actually, it's on all platforms, and it's kind of like the poor man's Photoshop, and it's an installable piece of software. And then you have Pixlr, Figma, and Canva, very, very popular image editors that are available online. There's free versions of all of them. All of them are capable of resizing, cropping, sharpening, recoloring, drawing on them. Canva and Figma are really pretty cool tools because let's say like you want to generate an image of something. They have AI built in now that can like say, hey, give me a picture of a squirrel jumping through a flaming hoop, something like that. And it'll make it for you. So you don't have to draw it if you're not an artist. So I always hear this from coders. Hey man, I'm not an artist. I just want to code. It's like, but there's tools out there where you can get the stuff, generate it yourself for free and not owe anybody any money on it. Right. So that's pretty important. And I have a lot of tips here on graphic editing tools and resources, and I'll let you explore that on your own. There's also stock photo repositories that you can explore as well. All right, as we kind of dig into like what types of images are good to use, right? There are some file formats for the web that are preferred over others. And the four most common ones used on web pages are the four that you see listed on this list. These are not the only ones that work in the browser, by the way. JPEGs, generally speaking, are best for photographic images because they have a deep color capability. They're compressed natively so that you can have very large images without a lot of storage space. However, they do not allow for transparency. So for example, if I had a logo and I wanted to see the background through the edges of the logo, I would switch to either a GIF or a PNG. A GIF is often used for logos with transparency. Many of you think of GIFs as being animated because they do have that capability, and there's GIF editing tools out there. If you want to create one, it's totally a thing. I'd say be careful with that, because if you do like a serious professional website, animations are kind of annoying, frankly. PNG kind of combines the best of both worlds, by the way, and a lot of web developers use that as the standard, by the way, for most of their stuff, because you can do photographic images. It also allows for animation, and it also allows transparency. However, for photographic images, it's not nearly as efficient as JPEG, because the compression is different. So I still like JPEGs generally for photos, PNGs for logos, transparency, and other general purpose images. There are some other formats you will run into out there that I did not list here. The new one that they're pushing a lot, that's typically actually a PNG in the background, is called WebP. So like web pictures. You'll also see JPEGs listed with just JPG or JPEG, or sometimes it's JFIF. Those are all JPEGs, by the way. Sometimes you can change the file extension on those and they still work. Then there's what we call the scalable vector graphics, which are not images at all. It's a set of instructions to build an image that's done mathematically. That's probably the most efficient size-wise, but they're also the most difficult to create if you're not an artist, right? There are tools out there that allow you, let's say, create a logo in Photoshop that allow you to turn it into an SVG. And I would say this is more of an advanced skill, and leave it to the graphics people. A couple tips here for where you can get photographs, either paid or free. There are, for example, Unsplash is a great resource where you can get free images, right? You just go get them, get what you need. There's also the Internet Archive, archive.org. That's a pretty good source for them as well. We talked about optimizing images, and I think we talked about the proper use of the image tag. And then the one thing that you can also do, and I'm just going to kind of throw this out there, is you can turn your images into a link. And I think that's kind of cool. In fact, I kind of have an idea for doing that. I'm going to bring up a Packers logo, and I'm just going to find one. And I don't know if I'm in Creative Commons mode. So I think actually what I'm going to do is I'm not going to filter by license, and I am going to find a logo that I can use. And yeah, I'm going to borrow this, but this is for academic purposes. I'm not making any money off of it. Now you can do a save image as right from this location, but usually when you're doing this Google tool, it's better to get to this mode and then do a right click, save as. I'm going to drop it right into my folder. That's not the right one. This is the right one. And notice how it's named. That's not a very good name. Let's just do, I'm going to rename it right off the bat, basically, because I just want it to be more efficient in my file system. So I'm just going to kind of get rid of some of this superfluous stuff. And I think Green Bay Packers logos PNG is pretty good. I want you to notice also this checkerboard indicates that this part of the image is transparent. So if I put it on top of another image or background, that the background will show through that area, but the image actually occupies that entire space. That might be a little big, and I'll just kind of put it out there that if you're not happy with that excess space, you could bring it into a tool, right? And pick whatever tool you want. And in this case, instead of resizing it, I might actually choose to crop it and pull this in like really, really tight and try to be, pretty uniform with the way I'm cropping it. So I'm getting rid of all that superfluous space it's occupying. Oops, sorry about that. And then when I'm all done, I'll just go ahead and save it, and that's my image now. So that's the one I'm going to use. And I just want to show you how quick and easy that is. And that's a very common kind of thing you do in web, right? You find an image you like, and then, all right, this is full size. I might even resize this a little bit. So this is 500 pixels wide. I might actually drop it down to I'm picking an arbitrary number here and we'll see what it looks like. Let's try 130 pixels. All right, that's kind of what I'm going for. I want a little Green Bay Packer logo and I want to put that up in my header on every page. I think that'll look kind of slick. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right, so that's my image now, and I'll close this tool, refresh the contents here, and let's go find a spot to add it to the page. And I'm not saying that this is the optimal spot to put it, but for now, I'm going to go into the header area, and I'm going to add my image here. Right, I'll do my src equals. I'll go in there, type I, go to images. Pull up my logo, see how naming it effectively helps find it really fast. And then I will put in my alt tag, which is required, and we'll say Green Bay Packers. And if I had multiple logos, I might say small or transparent. I'd be very descriptive. The other thing I'm going to do with it is, wouldn't it be cool if I set up a link so that every time somebody clicks the logo, it takes you back to the home page? Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So I'm going to wrap it with an anchor tag, and you can do it two ways. So I'm going to do it on a multi-line method. So I'm going to use href equals, and then inside here, what am I linking to? I'm going to link to my home page. Remember, home pages must be named index.html. It's not an option. It's what they must be named. And then we'll take the closing anchor tag and put it on the other side of the image. So this is one way to do it. The other way that you could format it is you could just put it all in one line. This one's reasonably short and works that way. Whatever works for you. The other thing that you should know is you can wrap an anchor tag around anything. Right. So if I have like a paragraph, I could wrap it around a paragraph and make the whole paragraph a link if I wished. Right. I don't think that's usually a good practice, but so here it is. This is on my about page right now, not my home page. So let's go to the browser and let's refresh the page. Okay, so there's the logo. All right. Apparently, that was not a transparent PNG because I don't see the background through it. So that was a little bit of a deception. Maybe I needed to go in there. But you know what? For now, let's just roll with this. And if you do find one that's actually transparent, I wouldn't see that checkerboarding around here. I would just see the yellow background. So that's the thing you can do. All right, let's keep moving forward here because we have more material to cover. I am going to take a break in a little bit, but I want to cover a few more things before we kind of move on. One thing that's kind of fun to do also is you can use CSS to take images and add them to the background of your page. And I think this is really kind of an interesting thing. Now, the truth is, right, the technique that they're demonstrating here would put an image in the entirety of the body, right? So the entire background of the whole website would have an image. And that might be something you want to do, or it might not be, right? And they're just suggesting a technique here. The important part here is really this little snippet of CSS. And you can copy that if you wish, but Visual Studio Code will help us build this. So here's kind of what I'm thinking for mine. What if I take a background image and maybe just place it in the header? So maybe I could have like, I don't know, like the grass of a football field or something like that. That might be kind of a cool background, or maybe an image of Lambeau Field or something of that nature. So I'm going to go ahead and let's find a logo. And maybe, like I should go in here and get the real transparent logo. All right. This looks like a very much not so legal website, by the way, if I must say so. And I'm not really sure that you should download it from here. This is not a good one. And I actually think this is kind of nice to run into these kind of problems. Let's actually put the filter on it for transparent. And this is kind of all taking us back. do the same thing. And you can, this is one of those things you can go down a rabbit hole just looking for images. And I'm not finding one. And I think what's happening is the Green Bay Packers really don't want us using their logo, at all. It might even not be a bad idea here to just do this and actually go to their website. This is, of course, an NFL site, and you can maybe grab the logo from there. And so I'm changing up what I'm doing, but you guys are going to do the same thing. This is part of the process of this. I'm not sure what format this is. I'm going to guess it's a PNG because it's transparent. Let's find out if it works. I'm going to go back to my code and alter this. And that's not where we had it. It was on the About page up here. So let's just get rid of that. And we'll use this one instead. Saving, back to the browser and refreshing. And that one didn't even load. So why didn't that one load? Let's try to figure that out because it's probably not a PNG. Right, and see, you guys are seeing all the problems that you have when you try to grab images from others. Apparently the Packers really don't want us using that logo. So I could crop the other image and make it transparent. I really don't want to go to that trouble right now. So I'm just going to keep hunting for something that's better. I'm trying to find one that's coming in with a file extension on it. You can see that it's not working. So I have a couple choices here. I can just experiment with that file extension. And I really didn't want to go down this rabbit hole because that could be a GIF. It could be a WebP. I just kind of figured it was a PNG because it was transparent. How about this? Let's take a 5-minute break. And while we're on break, I'll figure it out. And then we'll come back and I'll have a transparent one. How about that? All right. 5-minute break, folks. I'll see you in 5. All right. So apparently the Packers don't want you using their logo, period. Right. And they have it pretty well protected, but there's a bunch of sites that try to trick you into downloading it, which I'm like, all right, this isn't going to work. So I grabbed an older logo. I dropped it into Photoshop and I used Photoshop's tools to eliminate the background and actually turn it into a PNG. So now I can see that the background through the side of the image. It's not the crispest of images, mind you, but hey, you know what? This will work for demonstration purposes. I do want to do the background demonstration though. So I'm going to go back and do an image search of, how about football field grass? Okay, let's throw the word background in there. Once again, let's find something that's allowed to be used. And I apologize here, I just hit the wrong button there. Go to images. Let's see what we got for Creative Commons. And maybe even just grass would be good. And now we have to find the right grass. You get into that kind of, situation if you guys feel what I'm saying. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time making aesthetic choices here. And, and eventually I will make some choices. Let's see what happens here. So I'm back on another one of these sites. So I do not like this at all. It's amazing how much of that is out there. Maybe if I just do this. And this is why, real frankly, it's a good idea to create your own stuff, just to avoid issues like that. So, all right. So why don't we use one of the legal sites then? Let's go to Unsplash. That's probably one of my go-tos, and I don't know if you guys. See what we got here. Any particular grass we like? That one's pretty good. Oh, this one's not free. All right. So they have paid ones too. Let's do free. I think those are the premium ones up there. And you can see what happens is you end up finding ones that aren't great. I'm just going to go with that. And I know that this is not optimal. I want you to notice that this one's in WebP format. That's the format I was talking about. Let's just try it. And then we're going to try to add it to a background and see what happens, folks. All right. So where I'm going to target adding this is actually in the header. So in my style sheet, I'm going to address the header. That's already got a font applied to it. But now I'm going to say background image. And then I'm going to put in the URL. And then I'm going to say images. And we'll try that one. Right. And we'll just see what happens with it. So this is going to be a background just on the header if I did it correctly. So let's, all right. Not the prettiest thing. And I want you guys to be aware of that. I mean, what do you notice right off the bat? The green letters don't look good on green grass. The logo doesn't look too bad, but it's kind of touching the top. All right, I'm going to leave my example at that. You can take these images and put them in the background, and there's some tips in the lecture notes. Like if you do like a whole background on a whole page, you might opt to use some of these settings, because if you have an image that's really small and you put it in the background, it will repeat. And sometimes you don't want that. If you want it to fill the whole screen, you use this command. And if you want the image to be centered on the screen, you use that command. Right? You just add that to your CSS. Experiment with it. I think it's kind of a fun thing to do. The next thing that we're going to try is working with what we call a favorites icon. And I want you to think about this. As you're looking at the top of my browser screen right now, do you notice that the page I created has a generic icon on it? But then you look at the Gmail one or the Brightspace one or the Google one, and they have very distinctive icons that help you identify what site you're on. So what I could do is I could also generate a favorites icon, and there's websites that allow for this. If you go to W3 Schools, I don't know if they link you to that. Oh yeah, here you go. This is an example. So this is okay. So let's talk about this. This is technically called a favorites icon. I'm not really sure why. And then people in the industry will call it a favicon or whatever, right? But it's that little icon that goes in the browser tab. You can go to a tool like this, and this is kind of a neat tool, by the way, right? So you can take any image that you might have. Let's see if it loads up. There we go. And then I can import an image. So for example, I could take, try to get both things on the screen at the same time here. Import an image, or let's choose a file, and then I'll try to feed it that logo. I think because that would look kind of neat up there. We'll see if it works. The thing I'll give you a little tip about it, though, is not all images work. It prefers PNGs and GIFs, but this tool is designed to do like translation of those. And the images typically are best if they're square as opposed to rectangular. And I do not have either one of those things going, by the way. And let's see, it's got to be, it's got to be that one. All right. All right. Now, this is what it will break down to be. And I want you to notice that it's square in format or roughly square in format. It becomes very pixelated because it's going to be really tiny. But part of it is blank. And what I actually might want to do is color these in white. So you can do a little artwork here if you wish. And I'm putting way too much time into this, by the way. But you know what? This is kind of the nature of web work, real frankly. And then once you think you're all set, now I'm trying to figure out how to download it. Okay, here we go. Download. And there it is. And I want you to notice that when you download it, it has a file extension of ICO. I'm just going to copy this. Copy, and then I'll take it over here, and I will paste it into my image folder. There it is. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the format that's in the lecture notes. And in fact, if it's helpful for you, you can just copy the code right from there. And notice how it's helpful because it's really close to the correct syntax already. I think it might not work because of that / at the beginning, but we'll figure that out. So let's come into we'll add this to our about page. And I'm going to just drop it in like that. And I kind of think that's not going to work. I think I have to do that. We'll find out. And let's see. All right, so I'm going to save this, back over to the browser, go to the page, let's refresh, and there's the logo. All right, it might not be the prettiest thing. Maybe I should have made those transparent, not white, but there's kind of a little G up there, right? And then of course, if you do that to one page, you should really put them on all the pages, right? So you want to put that on all the pages because you want that little logo. I'm admitting that's not the nicest looking favorites icon. I'll let you guys get artistic and make it look really cool. You can also, I don't know if you noticed, but you can create them from scratch. Like if you're kind of have some ability to do that, it's not that hard to do. We're going to do a save all here. Once again, back to the browser. Let's hit all the pages. My favorites icon is loading on all of them. All right, pretty cool. My logo is not appearing on all these though, is it? Right. So I might want to add that code. And this is the kind of thing you're going to be doing, right? Like if I'm putting that bigger logo on every page, let's make that header consistent. I don't want to go from one page to another and then the site looks different. And granted, right now, this is not the most beautiful looking thing. And we will learn techniques for making it more beautiful. I will give you some sneak previews already, but now here's my home page, contact page, and about page. And it seems like I'm at different zoom levels for all of them. So that's kind of a thing. But when you're at the right zoom level, you see the consistency, right? It's the same menu, the same header, all that stuff on all the pages. The one little CSS trick I'll throw at you that it's not on our agenda for tonight, but I think it's just going to make it look nicer, is I'm going to throw some padding in the header. So you guys can do this too if you want. And it's not going to be a huge amount. It's maybe going to be, I don't know, like 35 pixels or something like that. And I'm speculating. What this does is it adds space inside the container so my logo is not touching at the top and my text is not touching at the bottom. Because it's in the style sheet, it'll apply to all pages. It's already saved. And notice what it does. So the padding is basically adding space inside the container all the way around. Yeah, that logo is ugly. So this is the kind of thing that happens with CSS, right? Is that, okay, now I don't like the logo. So that color of dark green is probably highly inappropriate. Maybe something much darker and really something contrasting would be appropriate. And I guess I'll go black. Let's just go black on it. Let's save that back over and refresh and notice how that pops a lot more from the background. I hate the font, by the way, but it is what it is. Tweak it to your heart's content, folks. All right, we're going to do stuff on fonts here in just a moment. And so that's the favorite icon. Let's go back to this discussion on colors here. And I really, was hoping to do maybe a really kind of deep dive on this here tonight, but I don't think we really have the time for it. I just want to refresh you the different color naming techniques. If you like to just use names for colors, they do have a list here on W3 Schools where you can look at them and go, oh, I like that one. And then you can just copy the name and use the color, right? So that's kind of nice. So if you know, for example, a certain color, what you do discover, right, is if you get into advertising and marketing, like, for example, the red of a Coca-Cola logo is a very specific red, and they have like a certain hex code and CMYK color that they use. It's not just regular red. So like, don't make that mistake. Sometimes companies publicize that and sometimes they don't, but you can come in here and choose by name. I think we looked at that last time. The other technique, of course, is to use these other formats. And I think maybe this tool that we were looking at, and I'm sorry for scrolling so quickly, they do have the little color mixer here that you can use, right? And you can start to kind of experiment. And then when you hit a certain color, pick that, shade that you want and get the right code. I do want to remind you that Visual Studio Code, if you don't like the color you're working with, you can mix your colors right here. And I think many of you I've noticed from your code are already using this, and I would encourage you to keep using this tool. The default output is in what we call RGB format. And what I'm going to demonstrate here is there's an alternate to RGB that's actually called RGBA. And this is one of the lecture things. So if you're going to use that technique, you add the additional character here, and then you add an additional number inside here. And what the final character stands for is A is for alpha. I think we already talked about first characters for red, second one's for green, the third one's for blue. This one is alpha, which is kind of the old-fashioned term for what we call opacity. So in other words, how transparent that color is relative to the background. If I set it for 1.0, which I'm doing right now, and I go back to my browser here, right, and let's refresh the page, there is no change. And I'm going to zoom in just to highlight it a little bit. Right, there's no change to it. If I go back to the CSS and I adjust this value, for example, down to 0, watch what happens. It disappears. It's there. Here, this is the weird thing. It's there. It's completely transparent. Isn't that weird? Right. Obviously, not really a good choice, right? Not from a design standpoint, but anything that you set in between 0 and 1. So let's say I want it to be 50% transparent, right? And I refresh. Notice the effect you get. Okay. I'm not saying that this looks good, right? But can you see the possibilities with it? I mean, this is kind of a neat effect. I would, if I'm going to use transparency, I might bump that up to like a 0.75 perhaps, but I also might change my font size, and I'm not sure where this font is being controlled from here. Oh, it's being controlled down here, and I'm not really liking that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that font size, and I want you to notice a trick I'm going to use here, which is to set the font size larger than it normally would be. And I can do this 2 different ways. I can just say, for example, I want that to be 150% of the size it would normally be. And I'll show you that it works. There's the refresh. Okay, but now the question is, hey, it got smaller, not bigger, right? It's 150% of the default font size for the page, not the default font size for the object, which is because I'm not really declaring a font size here. If I did declare a font size here, so for example, if I said font size 25 pixels, and we'll talk about sizing of fonts in just a little bit here. and I save that. Let's go take a look. And this is bigger than it normally would be, but if I remove that, save it, and I know I'm doing this very quick, so I apologize for that. We get this effect here. Now, whether or not you like this look, that's very subjective, and I'll leave it up to you. What's considered really good practice is to set a default font size for your page of a certain size, and then all the relative sizing that you do on a page is then subsequently controlled by each individual style. And what some people will do is they'll take the font size and they'll set it to a certain value, and then they'll change their mind and make it a different size with relative sizing. Now I'm going to remove this font size here. Watch what happens. Right, it gets smaller. That's the default size for an H1 with that font. And then what I might do here is I could either do a font size that's a specific size. So I'll just make something really large on purpose. I'm choosing an arbitrary amount of pixels. And just to show you that it does get bigger, you know, and much bigger. Notice what's happening to my grass here, how it's repeating in the background. Yeah, that doesn't really look great. All right, so you might do that, but you could also do what we call relative sizing. And I showed you can do 150%, for example. But an equivalent to that is to use what we call EMs. I'm not sure what the EM stands for, but you can go 1.5 EM, which is a percentage also, but it's represented with smaller numbers. 150% is identical to 1.5 M. And then you have this other one, which is REM, which is a relative percentage. That kind of goes a little bit deeper. We'll kind of leave it at there for right now. Some designers will always use pixels to define their fonts. Some will always use M's relative to a base font size. It is a very, very subjective choice. I tend to be of the camp where I like to always declare my pixels because then I have precise control. You'll read other sources that say, no, it's better to do percentages because then it scales to different screens better. And that is true, right? So you have to choose which you think is better. The other thing that I'm not really liking is that font family. And so what I might do here, and this is one of those things that we're going to talk about also, which is let's pick a different font family that's maybe a little bit more modern looking. And I might go with this one. This one's probably not a bad one. And I am applying it to everything in the header, so that may or may not be good. Let's see what happens. All right, much smaller. Yeah, it's a lot smaller. So I might change this and say font dash size. Now this will apply to all the fonts within there. Maybe what we want, maybe not. Let's make it 45 pixels. Saving, refreshing. Okay, here's my thought on this. Does NFC Central Historic Lambeau Field need to be the same size? And I'm going to say no. I don't think so. I don't think it needs to be. So I can tweak that. For right now, let's do a smaller font size. Let's do 24 pixels, about half the size. And then up here, I think I could probably do like 50 pixels and be okay. So this one will be different. It's more specific. So it should be, that one's big, the other ones are small. The other thing I'm going to try is because I was getting this repeating effect. You don't really see the repeats here, but there's a repeat here, here, and here for my image. And it might be really hard to see in the video, but I'm actually going to go back and borrow these techniques here and add them to the background of my style sheet for the header background image. So I'm going to put those here. Yes, it came in really messy, and you can do the right click format selection and it cleans it up for you. Isn't that nice? Nice little trick. Control S to save, back to the browser, and refreshing. All right, so now it's not repeating, but now what happened? Now it looks really fuzzy because it's really big on the screen. So this is the kind of the balance that you kind of come up with, folks. Um, I don't think that looks good. You know, I would probably find better grass. You know what I mean? Um, and please don't be afraid to experiment to your heart's content until you get effects that you like. And overall, I don't like the look of this header. Eventually, I'd like to get the logo over here and Green Bay up here, and then put other stuff up there and arrange it in a different way. But let's just roll with this for now. I think that looks all right. Let's move on to our next lecture topic here. If I can find my actual browser. We did the favicons. We talked about the colors, alt text, color contrast we've talked about before. But now we're going to talk about selectors. And selectors are basically the mechanism that we use in a style sheet to select which item on the HTML page is going to receive a style, right? And that's pretty important. What we've learned to do so far is to basically just use the name of the tag that we want to affect. Okay, that makes sense. I want to put a color on the H1, so I did it. And I want a font size for the H1, so I did it. But what if I wanted to apply a style to multiple items on the page and use the same style? Well, this is kind of an interesting thought. I need some content to work with. So probably the best page to work with is maybe this page here. Because for example, I have paragraphs, I got block quotes, I got lists. And really, you know, like if you feel like you don't have enough content, you know, what I tell people is, well, you can just take a paragraph and just, you know, for experimentation, for example, just paste it in a couple of times, just so I have multiple paragraphs. And my point of this is to really do a demonstration, because one way to apply a style is just to attach it to a tag. But the other way to apply a style is to do a class declaration. So I'm going to add this to this paragraph, and I'm going to add it to another object or two as well. And I'm just going to come up with, maybe I'll just call this info for right now, right? This is, and maybe I'll call it something more meaningful, like GBP info. Notice no spaces in there. And it's all inside of double quotes. Then I'll take this class declaration and also add it to some other object, okay? So for example, maybe I'll add that to, okay, maybe not the NFC North, maybe I add it to this list item. And maybe I add it to that list item, you know, all the ones that say Green Bay Packers, basically. So notice a class can be applied to multiple objects on a page, right? Then, instead of saying, well, I want this paragraph to have this color and this list item to have that color and this list item to have that color, and I can do it actually with what we call descendant selectors, and it gets really complicated. Or I can apply a class statement to multiple objects and control them all at once here in the style sheet. I'm going to add this way to the bottom, and I'll come back to the margin. And whenever you're trying to attach a style to a class declaration, you use a period at the beginning, and then what was that, GBP-info, I believe. And then we'll put in our style. So maybe I'll just do a font color for right now, just to kind of get that point going. So we'll just do dark green because that's kind of an easy one, right? And then if I want to change the green, I can, you know, tweak it like that. That's kind of a Green Bay Packery kind of color. I'll press enter, and it's locked in, saving it. Now let's go back to the index page, right? So that's the home page. And then notice that one paragraph is dark green. And I know it's hard to tell here, but this is dark green and that's dark green. And All right, let's take it a little bit further so it's a little bit more visible. Here's another font technique that you can use, and here's one that we call font weight. Font weight is a way to make a font, notice, bold, bolder, lighter, normal, or whatever, right? And you can also declare how bold something is. A normal font is 400, by the way. When you slide up the scale, it's bold. I'm just going to choose bold. I think that's a pretty easy thing to choose. I'm going to save it. And then all the stuff that receives that style, regardless of where it is, whether it's a paragraph, that list item, that ordered list item, notice how all of them became bold and dark green. Isn't that slick? So you can control multiple objects, and not just on one page, but across your whole website. So that's kind of a slick technique. If you have the need to attach a style to one specific object on the page, then we use a different approach called an ID, right? So we will take a tag and put an ID on it. And I'm trying to think of one that would be a good one to put an ID on. Maybe it would be, let's just use this paragraph as an example. So I'll just give it an ID and say intro paragraph. All right, not super descriptive, but kind of descriptive. Right, so now the difference with an ID is I can only use an ID once on a page. I cannot use it multiple times, just once, right? You can try to use it and your styles will probably break. And then if I want to attach a style to that, instead of starting with a period, I start with a pound sign. And what did I call it? Intro paragraph, I think. And I'll do my little styly things here. And apparently that's not what I called it. That is what I called it. Okay. For whatever reason, it's not finding it. Did I misspell it? I don't think I misspelled it, but hey, I'll just put it in. And maybe it's because I didn't save it. It's saved. And it's because I don't have a style yet. Let's make the color something, ridiculous. Let's just do red. That's pretty simple. And then we can do something even weirder, like font size. And let's do like an example of like 2.7 M, 270% bigger than what it would normally be. Save it. Let's go back to that index page. And remember, I'm not saying that these are wise aesthetic choices, by the way. There we go. In fact, I'm hoping that you're gasping, going, oh my God, that's horrible, because it is. But it shows you that I can pick one particular object and control it without using, paragraph as the selector. The ID becomes much more specific. Right. Okay. This is a work in progress, and I'm not saying that this looks good, but when we get a couple weeks from now, we'll start focusing more on the design aspects and really will try to make it look really nice. Right. So this is kind of the byproduct of testing. Maybe 2.7 M is a little ridiculous. Maybe we can make this more like 1.5. I think is more reasonable. Let's refresh it. Okay. I still hate the color, still hate the size, whatever, but now I can kind of look at it a little bit, but it's not horrifying. All right, moving on. All right. What I do want to talk about though with these selectors, right? So the three approaches: use the tag. These are the primary approaches. Set up a class, and then it starts with a period, right? And then you set up an ID, and you start with a hashtag or the pound sign. IDs only work on one element. Classes you can apply to many elements. And of course, the paragraph or the tag name will, of course, select the tag name. We've already looked at an example, by the way, that if several elements share a style, you can list them like this. So you can say a table tag, the table header tag, and the table data tag can all have borders separated by commas. Another thing to think about is we have a way to do what we call a descendant selector. And the way that this works is I can say inside my UL tag, the list item that's inside of it, that's how it reads, right? So look for UL tag, and then inside there somewhere, there's an LI tag. I want to apply this style, and maybe I'll do something like color fuchsia, if that's, I'm spelling it correctly. There, yep, there it is. And that will apply just to the unordered list items, right? That's a hard one to say. And so watch this list here with the bullet points refresh and become fuchsia. Of course, this one's being overridden by the class declaration. And so you kind of see the effect of that, right? So that's called the descendant selector. Because why is it called a descendant selector? Because in the code, the UL is the parent tag that holds the LIs. The LIs are children of the UL tag. So it's a descendant or the child tag of UL. So that's what they mean by descendant selector. And if you have an object inside an object inside an object inside an object, you can declare all of those and get very specific and dig down to the one you want. I'm going to argue that I think adding classes are easier, but that's kind of a personal choice. There's also a universal selector, which, for example, if I wanted, for example, to do this, and we're going to do this when we start talking about the box model. This is a very common thing to add to control the size of our boxes. And basically this selector, the asterisk, means we're applying it to every object on the page. That one you got to be careful with, right? There are times when you use it and times when you don't. This is probably one of the more useful commands that way, but we're not quite ready for that one. That's like next week, I think. We're doing box model. The descendant selector. So for example, we look inside the nav tag and the anchor tags inside of it will be colored blue. That's pretty common. There's other more complicated ones, and I'm not really going to demonstrate these here, but we can also indicate child selectors using the special character. I tend to avoid it, honestly. And then there's also the sibling selectors, so when things are at the same hierarchy within a document, you can pick the next paragraph after an H2. That's kind of a weird one. Or the general sibling selector, all the paragraphs following an H2. I would call these down here advanced techniques, and I wouldn't really worry about them right now, but I do want to make you aware that they exist, right? There's documentation on them if you really want to dig into it. I'm going to circle back to this one, and I'm going to demonstrate kind of a neat little effect that you can add to your navigation to make your navigation and your links pop a little bit more. Right? So one thing, when I look at a web page and it's like, you know what? Sometimes it's kind of nice to have the links have an underline. I think that's kind of cool, right? Because it's a link, right? That's why they're like that. And you also notice that links, like if you haven't visited them, they're blue. And if you have visited the page, it's purple, right? And that's built into the browser, does that automatically. But I'll tell you what, in my navigation, I don't like that look at all. In fact, that's one of the places where I always override that default. And I'm going to show you a couple little techniques to make that navigation look much nicer. So we're going to kind of dig into styling our nav right now. We're also going to use, and I should go back and hit the lecture topic here, what we call a pseudo-class. So this is a class that doesn't actually exist, but it's reactive to the current state of the browser and your mouse position. So the browser automatically, if I hover over a link, it doesn't change. But I could make my link change colors by hovering over it by adding this to my selector. Or if it's actively being clicked or currently on the current page, we can add these two. I use these rarely. There's also this nth-child thing. That one gets a little complicated too, but we'll play with that when we start styling tables. But a really common thing to do for designers is, for example, and this is, by the way, this is how the browser's default CSS is set for links, right? So an anchor tag that's a link will be blue. One that you visited would be purple. If you hover over it, this command here would take away the underline. Okay, that's kind of interesting. And then this one would be if it's active, like your mouse is clicked and held down on the link, it would be red. Don't believe me? Like go here and click on a link and hold down your mouse. There's red, right? Yeah, interesting. All right, so let's kind of experiment with those a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a combination of approaches here. Now, my nav is actually towards the top of my document, so I'm not going to put my style for it at the bottom. I'm going to move it kind of up to the top. So I already have that kind of going on, and I have a background color on it. I'm also going to add a little padding to my nav, by the way, and you'll see why, because it just looks better, basically. So feel free to copy the technique. But this is just styling the nav itself. Let's just take a look at what I just did to it. So just so you guys see what the padding does. It gives it a little bit of breathing room. That might even be too much, right? But words don't look good on a web page when they touch objects, basically, in my opinion. So adjust that to your heart's content. Right. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make the links in my nav react to a hover command. So I'm going to say nav A. So in other words, the anchor tag inside my nav. I'm going to say text decoration none. And what this does is the underline's considered a decoration. So this is telling it to remove. So I'm going to save that. Take a look. There it is. It's gone. Still works as a link. See, it's changing my pointer. Kind of slick, I think. Okay. You can have your opinions about it if you want. And then if I want it to react to a hover, I'm going to copy this again. And I want you to watch what I do here. I'm going to say colon hover, which every time I hover over it, what color do I want that link to change to? Interesting, because right now it's blue, right? So I could, and I'm just throwing it out there, I could make it change to, let's just get the color tool up there. Maybe we change it to like, I don't know, purple, Viking purple. No, I'm sorry. Gotta have a little fun. But it would also look good if actually the default color of my link is maybe that dark green. And, you know, I think I've already determined that that green is not dark enough. So let's make it a little darker. Let's go with that. All right. And you guys can copy this techniques, use your own colors. So I'm going to refresh. Okay. You can't really tell it's dark green, but watch what happens when I move my mouse over it. See how it's changing color? Pretty slick, right? Very, very easy to do. And it shows the user that it's a link. And then if I click on the link and follow it, the color doesn't change, right? We'll reset our zoom to 0 here. 100%, I mean. So because it's applied to all the pages, right, it's consistent. And so what I don't know if you guys are feeling this, but what I'm driving you towards is creating like a header section and a navigation and then ultimately a footer that are all consistent in format and look, so that when your visitors come to your site and start clicking between pages, it's not like, is this the same site? Right. And also to get you to follow some common practices for layout. Now, right now we haven't learned layout techniques to make this look better, but we will ramp that up and fix it, by the way. All right. So those are pseudo classes. All right, I did want to talk a little bit about some of these, and we've played with some of them already. One was font weight, and let me do a really quick pause here on the recording. All right, so some of these font properties we've played with a little bit already. We talked about font weight. So that's basically making a font bolder. The default for a font is 400 weight, and then a stronger number, a bigger number makes it more bold. And there is a gradation to that, by the way. Font style, of course, is something that controls some aspects, for example, like making a font italic. Now, we also know that we can make a font italic by putting the I tag around it in the HTML, but here's a way that you can do it with CSS style. So if you wanted a whole paragraph to be italic, you could do that. The text decoration thing we just played with as well. Common text decorations are none, and that's to get rid of underlines, mostly like on links. To add an underline, add an overline, or add a line through. Those are all text decorations you can add. I use this a lot, mostly for getting rid of the underlines on links, and I like that. Here's one that you can play with, and I'll just demonstrate this one really quick, where if you don't like the spacing of your paragraphs, I'm just going to go back to my home page here. So in other words, like the text here might feel really, really tight. And I think that's really tight. And honestly, what happens with the human eyes is when they're reading text on the screen, they look at this and they go, you know what, that's really hard to read. Partially, they don't really know why, but partially because the words are squeezed so close together. The other reason here is the words are really wide and it's really better for them to be narrow. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a line height to my block quote to make the spacing between the lines a little bit more palatable, is a polite way to say it. So I'm going to just put in a style here for block quote. I could also put a class on it if you want. And in fact, no, let's try that approach instead. Let's, all right, and it's on my block quote tag here. So I'm going to go into my index page and I'll add a class. Oh, it's already listed as highlight. You know what? Let's just add the style to highlight then, since the style already exists. So right here, I'm just going to increase the line height. Oops, got to type it right though. And then, well, I think what they did was 1.6 M was the example. Now that's 160% of what it should normally be. And I think that was what the example said, right? I just kind of want to follow. Oh, no, they're just using 1.6. All right, so let's just use 1.6. We'll save that. Back to the browser. And refresh and watch the block quote, which is blue here. And notice how it's spread apart a little bit. So this is a very subjective setting also. This is one I commonly use though, especially when the text is really small. Kind of for the same reason like you double space a paper. It is easier to read. And it basically lets it breathe a little bit. And I think it's just easier to read for sure. All right. Another thing that you might want to consider doing is doing a little bit of an alignment for your text. And I know we've played with this one already. In fact, we put it on our H1 in the header of our document, which is why this stuff sits in the center. And I know this is not very readable right now, and we'll have to fix that as we go forward. But that's centered by virtue of that text align command. And I think I had put that, where did I put that exactly? So the header, the footer, and the nav were set to align to the center. And I think in the future, I'll adjust that. There are, of course, alternates to this, as you might suspect, right? Because the normal default is to align to the left, but you can align left or right or center. Those are probably the three most common. There's also justify. And if you're not sure what justify does, you notice how these paragraphs have like a ragged edge? A justify, yeah, well, I don't think we want to put it there actually, but we could maybe add it to the block quote again, or to the highlight. So let's leave this one at center. That's pretty obvious what that one does. But let's take that highlight and do a text dash align :justify. This is kind of an interesting one. I'm not sure I always like the look of it, frankly, but maybe this is something that would work for your website. But you notice what it did is it forced spaces into the paragraph so that the edges are straight. That's a justify command. Once again, you can make it a line left, a line right. That's all on you, right? Very subjective design choices, folks. The last little tidbit in the lecture materials is that we can also do what we call text transform. And so, like, for example, if I wanted to take text and turn it into all uppercase, or if it's already all uppercase and turn it into all lowercase, those are all doable. And I'm not going to demonstrate this one, but you might have a reason for using it somewhere. The other options, and I'm just going to type this in just so you can see like what the options are basically with text transform. So you can capitalize, that means making the first letter capital of each word, make it all lowercase, make it all uppercase, or remove a transformation if one already exists. And some of these other settings are relevant to us right now. We call those advanced, but play with it if you want. I mean, I guess I could just, do an uppercase here just to show you that's not really a big deal. Here comes the refresh, and notice how that's all uppercase. Maybe you dig that. I'm going to say I kind of don't. All right. A couple other things I want to point out before I wrap up the video. So those are the lecture notes, stepping through all the materials. I still recommend real strongly that you investigate all the links I provide here. Some of them are the same as in the lecture notes, but I also have these other things here that you might want to refer to. I think the Microsoft Developer Network stuff has got a lot of really good information on how to do styling, and it's a little different perspective than W3 schools. I also want to point out some of the other content here. So as you guys are working through here, I will be posting this video here. The PowerPoint from our old textbook is here. You might find this one useful in this chapter. It's not required, but it's got a lot of the information I covered tonight is in there. Also, the coding examples that I'm doing here in class are available here. And right now, this is not including Unit 5 because I'm still recording it, obviously. But if you want to look at the code for, let's say you're going through the Unit 4 stuff, and then you're like, man, I wish I could get the code and see it, and maybe copy it and borrow from it. You can come here and click through, and then just right click and view page source, and you have the code I'm using in videos. It's just really that simple. So please feel free to look at that. I will be adding Unit 5, as I said, shortly. Let's go back to full zoom here. The other little entry that I've added here talks about graphic editing tools, some really popular tools to use. I know I was talking about this earlier. Truly, the default standard in the industry, if you're really a working professional, is a lot of people who do proper image editing do prefer Adobe Photoshop still, right? It is an industry standard for a reason, but it's also very expensive. You have to pay a subscription. The subscription is not cheap. The professional subscription somewhere in the $80 a month range for the full Adobe suite. That's not just one product though. It's like 20 different products, including video editors and animation tools and audio tools. And oh my God, just huge stuff. So when you don't want to pay money, you often go to some of these free tools. GIMP is one that's been around a really long time. I used to use it myself before I would subscribe to the Adobe Cloud. But if you don't want to either install something, you don't want to pay money, I would have you look at these three. Pixlr is more of a straight up image editor, and it's got a few different modes you can operate in. I use like the basic one, and it allows you to crop images and resize them and sharpen them and draw on them and things like that. And then you have these two tools, which I think are really super cool and powerful. I'd say especially Canva. Canva in particular has a lot of AI tools built into it, and they let you use some of it for free, by the way, where you can basically give it a prompt like saying, hey, I want a logo for my, hot dog stand or something like that. And it'll generate it with AI, and you can use it, and it's free, right? I mean, try to beat that. These tools also, Figma and Canva, are also really good tools when we get to the point of talking about site design and we start thinking about creating wireframes before we create a website. These are go-tos for a lot of designers. There are professional products like Adobe's got Adobe XD, for example, and there's Balsamic and mockups and stuff. We'll talk about those as we move forward. I also don't want to have you ignore that your operating system has built-in tools, and attached to your Google accounts through school, there is the Google Drive image editor that you can go into Google Drive, create a new image, and there's an editing and graphics creation tool right there. It is kind of primitive, but it does work, and it's free, which is a great price. And then, as I demonstrated here in Windows, there's Paint and Paint 3D and the image preview tool, all of which can resize. I think Paint 3D is the best one at doing more advanced stuff. So if you don't want to pay, there's another option. The Mac's also got its preview tool with basic editing capabilities. I also want you to look at some of these links here. These are links that both Wendy Revolinsky and I have been kind of putting together over the years. I have not updated these, so I assume they all still work. So like spots to get images, talking about copyright issues with images. And what I will tell you, it's very uncool to steal people's images from the internet, but people do it all the time. But it's better either create or find legal ones or pay somebody even to do it, by the way. And then if you're looking for inspirations, right? So I showed you the CSN Zen Garden, but here's some other places that you might want to check out. I did also want to talk a little bit about fonts and font categories. And, I kind of quickly glossed over the whole font family thing again today because really we ran out of time, and I'm now recording to an empty classroom, but everybody has either other classes to go to or other obligations, so I get it. But when you start putting fonts on the screen, fonts do fall into categories, right? So when we do font families, there are fonts that have basically decorations on them. And what I'll do here is I'll say example of serif font, right? And basically what a serif is on a font are these little wings and edges on the fonts, like the flourish and the foot and the little extra thing at the top. Those are called serifs. And there's a whole category of fonts that fit in there. And notice Google reads my mind here, right? Then we have like sans serif fonts, and here's a thing where I'm hoping this actually has yeah, there you go. So the serifs have the little decorations. Sans serifs do not. They tend to be straight lines, right? So those are the two common categories. But there's also what we call monospace fonts. And those are ones that look basically like the code fonts that we're coding with in our coding engine. So for example, if I'm in Visual Studio Code, I'm not sure exactly what font this is, but these are monospace fonts, meaning that every letter occupies the same amount of space. Often when I put together my coding assignments, I do the code snippets or examples in a monospace font, so it looks different than the sans serif or serif font I'm using otherwise. There's also categories of fonts. For example, what we call fantasy fonts, that just, that look really bizarre, and sometimes they're based on different TV shows or themes or whatever. And then there's also cursive fonts that look, as you would suspect, like cursive handwriting somewhat, right? Loosely. There are a bunch of font repositories. We're on one right now. This is Font Space. And notice that some of these are marked for personal use for free. So you make a personal website, that's okay. If you start like running your business off of it and make your logo out of it, well, then it stops being free. And I want you to be aware of that. There's also the Google font repository. And that's probably more commonly used by web designers. And you'll notice that they, have different tools to help you kind of figure out what font you want to use, relative to categories, or even like ones for holidays, for example. And you really have to explore here. But if you find a font that you like, let's say you like this font for your website, they have instructions here for being able to basically generate the code to add it to your website. And I'm struggling to find where that code is at the moment. Oh, right here, get font, right? And then they give you examples on how you can use it. Now, generally, when you're using a font like this, there's two ways to do it. You can download the font. There's actually a file you add to your website. And then you just add it to your font list in font family, and it'll find it, right? Because it's in the same folder structure. Or you can use the embed code, which might be the better way for most people. And basically what you do is you add the code that they give you here to every page that's using the font. And then in your CSS styles, you would just at a minimum add the font family that includes the font name, and then you can utilize it. Now there's additional settings that you can follow with, but you can just copy this code. This would go in your HTML, this would go in your CSS, and then you have the font and you can use that exact font. And as long as the person is viewing your website on the internet, of course, Google servers where the font comes from will come in. But this is a really common technique, folks, for adding very customized fonts. The Google font repository is really a pretty cool one, and I've used it for many projects myself. So here's all the different categories. I am working on building the assignment right now, so I'm not going to show you that. I also have a little bit of additional content down here at the bottom of the page that I want you to explore. This is focused on really kind of the career path of a web developer. So places where you can look for work, the kind of job titles you might search for, and kind of tasks you might do when you become a developer. And then if you're interested in going out there and trying to find work, there's also what we call consulting companies that are basically tech placement firms, and Tech Systems and Avanade and Skyline and Brooksource are all ones that do hiring in our area. Tech Systems in particular right now is doing some of the hiring for Microsoft, for example, and Brooksource, of course, they do for a lot of big companies. So this is something to explore, but this is superfluous to the content. But I think it's interesting, and you guys should take the time to explore that. All right, folks, that wraps Unit 5 content. The assignment will be released shortly after the video is released so that you guys can work on it. And then next week, we're going to be looking at Unit 6, which I think we're talking about the box model next week. So this video ends here. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.